The attorney didn't say anything right away. He just set the envelope down on the desk between us, smoothed the edge of it with 2 fingers, and looked at me the way people do when they already know what's inside and they're giving you a moment before your life changes. Mr. Disprode, Calloway, he said quietly, you're going to want to read this carefully. I'd been sitting in that chair for maybe 3 minutes, and already my hands felt wrong, too heavy, too still. Outside the window, downtown Knoxville moved like it always did. Cars at the light, a woman walking a dog, somebody's lunch getting cold on a bench. None of it had any idea what was happening in that office. All of this because of a ring my daughter-in-law called junk. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Howard Calloway. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a floor supervisor at a mid-size auto parts manufacturer outside Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm not somebody who makes the news. I'm somebody who shows up on time, eats the same breakfast 4 days a week, and knows how to fix most things with what's already in the garage. When my wife Barbara passed 11 years ago, I learned how to cook 3 meals and let the rest go. You adjust, you keep moving. My mother, Loretta, lived alone in the house on Birchwood Road, the same house I grew up in until she was 81. Small place, white siding, a porch that leaned slightly to the left. She kept roses in the front yard that were older than me, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee, and something baking even when she hadn't baked in weeks. Just the walls, I think, soaked in from decades. Mom was sharp until close to the end, not perfect, but sharp. She forgot small things, appointments where she'd set her glasses, but she remembered what mattered. Names, faces, who said what to whom, and in what year. When she told a story, she told it right. No gaps, no wandering. She died on a Tuesday in March. Quietly, in her own bed, the way she'd always said she wanted to go. I got the call at 5 in the morning from the neighbor who checked on her. By the time I got there, it was still dark, and the roses weren't blooming yet, and the porch light was on because she never turned it off at night, said it was for me in case I came by late. I stood on that porch for a minute before I went in. My son Devin and his wife Melissa arrived around noon. Devin lives 40 minutes away in Maryville. He's a project manager for a construction firm. Steady income, good with spreadsheets. Melissa is a real estate agent. She has the kind of smile that's always working, even when nothing's funny. They'd been married 8 years. We'd always been polite with each other, Melissa and me, never close, polite. Within an hour of arriving, Melissa was walking through the rooms, not grieving, assessing. She touched the edge of the dining table and mentioned that solid oak pieces like that could bring something at estate sale. She looked at the china cabinet and said the pattern was dated. She paused at the mantle where Mom kept a row of small things, a carved wooden bird, a silver thimble, a framed photo of my father in his army uniform, and a ring box. The ring box was velvet, dark green, worn soft at the corners. Mom had kept it there as long as I could remember. Melissa picked it up, opened it. Inside was a ring gold band, small oval stone, the color of pale amber. Not flashy, simple, the kind of thing a man buys on a factory salary in 1956 because he saved for 4 months to do it. It was my grandmother's engagement ring. Melissa held it up toward the window light, turned it once, and set the box back down. Costume jewelry, she said, more to herself than anyone. Probably worth nothing. She said it lightly, the way you'd say it about a coffee mug. Something moved in my chest. I didn't say anything. A few days later, when Devin and Melissa were packing boxes in the bedroom, I went back to the mantel and picked up the ring box. I don't know exactly what I was planning to do with it. I just knew I didn't want it going into a donation bin. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. That evening, Melissa asked if I'd seen the ring. Said she thought it might be worth something after all. I told her I hadn't touched anything. I don't know why I said that. I just did. 3 days after the funeral, when the house was quiet and Devin and Melissa had gone back to Maryville, I sat at my mother's kitchen table and turned the ring box over in my hands. Inside the lid, pressed flat against the silk lining, was a small piece of paper I hadn't noticed before, folded twice. My mother's handwriting. Careful, slanted, the way she'd written grocery lists my whole life. Howard, take this to Gerald Fitch at Fitch and Monroe on State Street. No one else. Just you. Gerald Fitch was my mother's attorney. I'd met him once, years back. A quiet man, careful. I called his office that same afternoon. The drive to Knoxville took 20 minutes, but I took the long way without meaning to. I kept thinking about Melissa's hands on the ring, the way she'd turned it toward the light, the way she'd said costume jewelry the same way she said dated furniture, like my grandmother's whole life was a clearance section. My phone rang when I was 10 minutes out. Devin. Hey, Dad. Just checking in. You doing okay? I told him I was fine, running an errand. An errand, he repeated. He didn't say anything else for a second. You didn't take anything from the house, did you? Melissa thinks she might have misplaced something. I said I'd taken a few old tools from the shed, nothing valuable. Right, Devin said. Sure. Hey, we were thinking we'd handle the estate paperwork. Save you the stress. You've got enough going on. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in the parking garage for 4 minutes after I turned the engine off, just sitting. My son was 38 years old, and he'd been married 8 years, and I had always given him the benefit of the doubt, because he was mine and because I wanted to. But there are certain things you know and can't unknow once you notice them. Devon had never once offered to help with anything that wasn't also convenient for Devon. Gerald Fitch stood when I walked in. He was in his late 60s, grey at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His office had the feel of a place where people told the truth and let it cost what it cost. He shook my hand. Your mother told me you'd come, he said. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and waited until I sat before he did. She made some changes, he began, about 14 months ago. The estate documents. He opened a folder on his desk. Before he continued, he looked at me clearly, steadily. There's something you should know first. He told me that in September of the prior year, someone had contacted his office requesting a copy of Loretta Calloway's estate documents. The caller said they were representing the family and were preparing to assist with financial planning. They provided a signed authorization form by fax. The form had my mother's signature on it. Gerald had called my mother directly at her home number, unannounced, to confirm. She told him she hadn't signed anything. She didn't know what he was talking about. She told him not to send anything to anyone. He hadn't. Who made the call, I asked, though by then something in my gut already knew. The caller identified herself as Melissa Calloway, Devon's wife. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside the window a bus went by and a woman pushing a stroller, and 2 kids arguing about something, and none of it registered at all. Gerald set a folder on the desk and placed the ring box on top of it. Your mother brought this to me 2 weeks before she passed, he said. She asked me to give it to you and only you when you came. I reached out and took the box. I already knew the ring. What I didn't know was the second piece of paper folded beneath it. Different from the note in the lining. Thicker, notarized. I read it slowly. My mother had written, clearly, precisely, in front of a notary public, that she was of sound mind, that she had become aware that someone had attempted to access her legal documents without her consent, that she had not authorized anyone to act on her behalf financially, and that any documents purporting to grant such authority were to be considered fraudulent, that she had revised her estate to reflect her true intentions, and that those intentions were documented in the updated will held by Gerald Fitch. At the bottom, a line I had to read twice. I am not confused. I know exactly what is happening. I want Howard to know I have taken care of it. I set the paper down on my knee and looked at the window. My mother had been 81 years old, living alone, and she had been clearer and more deliberate than anyone else in this story. Gerald gave me a moment. Then he explained. 14 months before her death, Loretta had come to his office alone. She'd taken a bus because she didn't want to ask anyone for a ride. She told him that her daughter-in-law had begun asking questions about the estate, that she'd mentioned more than once that an assisted living facility might be a good idea, that she'd made comments about the house, its value, its upkeep, its potential, that Devon had started managing her prescriptions and her bank card for convenience, he'd said. She didn't want to upset Devon, Gerald said carefully, but she didn't trust what she was seeing. She updated the will. She moved certain things. The house, the contents of a savings account she'd kept separate since my father died, into a trust she'd set up years ago. The ring she gave to Gerald directly. She told him to give it to me if I came. If I didn't come, if I let it go, He was to donate the contents of the trust to her church's benevolence fund. She'd given me a test I didn't know I was taking. I held the ring box, turned it over once in my hands. The stone was real, amber-colored sapphire, Gerald said, antique, more valuable than his looks. But that's not why she kept it. I knew that. She kept it because my grandmother wore it every day of her married life, and when she died she gave it to my mother, and my mother set it on the mantle where she could see it every morning when she came downstairs and had her coffee. Gerald told me what came next. He had already been in contact with the financial crimes investigator at the state level. A routine step once fraudulent authorization attempts were documented. The unauthorized fax, the forged signature, the pattern of requests, it had all been logged. "We're going to need you to not say anything to anyone," he said. "Not Devin, not Melissa, not yet. You're asking me to go home and act normal." "Yes," he said, "for now." I drove home the way I came, slow. The long way. That evening, Devin called again. Just checking in, same words as before, same careful tone underneath them. He mentioned that Melissa thought the estate process would go smoother if we consolidated everything through one attorney. He had someone in mind. Said it would save time. I said I'd think about it. Then I sat in my kitchen for an hour with the ring on the table in front of me, and I thought about my mother getting on a bus by herself to go protect what was hers. I thought about her sitting in Gerald's office and her good coat, the naughty one, the one she wore to church. 81 years old, speaking clearly, taking care of things. I hadn't known she was doing any of it. Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa called 3 times. Each call was friendly, surface level. She asked how I was sleeping. She mentioned the house on Birchwood Road and whether I'd thought about listing it. She said Devin was worried about me managing everything alone at my age. At my age. I was 63 at the time. I listened, said little, took notes after each call, time, date, what was said. My mother had kept records. I figured I could too. Devin started texting, short messages, checking in. Once he mentioned that the savings account, he used those exact words, the savings account, had probably been forgotten about. Said it might not even be worth the hassle of the legal process. Said sometimes the simplest thing is just to close it out quietly. He didn't know I knew what was in it. My mother had kept a separate savings account since 1987. She'd opened it the year after my father died. Put in a small amount each month, every month for 35 years. She'd never mentioned it. Never once. Gerald told me the balance was $214,000. She'd done it by saying less and doing more. That was always her way. 2 weeks after my meeting with Gerald, a woman called my cell phone. She introduced herself as an investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Financial Exploitation Unit. Her name was Agent Sandra Pruitt, and she said my mother's name had come up in connection with a pattern of complaints the Bureau had been tracking. "Pattern," I said. "Several," she said carefully. "We're not going to go into detail yet, but what I can tell you is that what your mother documented was thorough. She gave us something to work with. She asked me to continue not confronting anyone. Said they were close to being ready to move. I asked her how long. Soon, she said. That night, Devin and Melissa came over for dinner. Melissa brought a bottle of wine and wore a dress that was a little too nice for Tuesday. She complimented my kitchen, said she'd forgotten how much natural light it got. Devin was quieter than usual. He watched me the way people do when they're trying to read whether you know something. I made pot roast. We talked about football. I poured the wine and passed the bread, and I did not say a single word about any of it. After they left, I stood in the driveway and watched their headlights disappear. Then I went inside and called Agent Pruitt and left her a voicemail saying dinner had gone fine and I was ready for whatever came next. She called back the next morning. "We're moving on Friday," she said. Both of them at the same time. Friday came the way. Fridays do when you're waiting for them. Slow until the moment they arrive. I stayed home. Pruitt had asked me to. I sat in my kitchen with coffee I wasn't tasting and waited. At 8:47 a.m., my phone rang. "It's done," Pruitt said. "They're in custody. Devon's at the county office. Melissa was picked up at a property showing." I thought of Melissa at a property showing. Badge coming out in front of her clients. That practiced smile going still for once. I didn't feel glad. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 2 weeks and hadn't noticed until I finally let it out. Devon's attorney called that afternoon. Professional voice, soft around the edges, said Devon was very remorseful, said he'd been influenced, said there was room for a conversation about the estate, perhaps a partial return of what had been misdirected, and that everyone could avoid the difficulty of a trial. Misdirected, I said. The attorney kept going. Talked about family. Talked about Devon being my son. He is my son, I said. Silence on the line. My mother was 81 years old, and she took a bus to an attorney's office by herself because she didn't feel safe asking her own family for a ride. I know what happened. I have all the paperwork. And what you're calling misdirected, I call something else entirely. He cleared his throat, said he'd be in touch. I hung up. The trial came in the fall. Knoxville in October, leaves turning. The kind of weather that's supposed to be beautiful and mostly is. I sat in the third row, not the front. I didn't need to see their faces up close. I'd seen them plenty. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s, no nonsense, brown hair, sensible shoes. She laid the case out the way you'd lay out tools before a repair job. Organized, methodical, no speeches. The evidence came in piece by piece, the faxed authorization form, the signature analysis. A forensic examiner explained the difference between a tremor-consistent signature and one that's smooth, careful, practiced. The jury watched the projector screen. On the left, my mother's real signature from documents spanning 30 years. On the right, the forged version. My mother signed her name with a slight upward lift at the end. Arthritis, Gerald had once told her, changes the pen angle. The forgery didn't have that. Too controlled. Too clean. Devon and Melissa had separate attorneys. By the second day, it was clear they were also starting to point at each other. Melissa's attorney argued she had acted with Devon's full knowledge. Devon's attorney said Melissa had overstepped. Nobody took responsibility for anything. That was somehow the least surprising part. Gerald Fitch testified. He described the day my mother came in on the bus. What she said. How she said it. He had notes from that meeting, typed up the same day. Date, time, substance of the conversation. She was not confused, he said, when the prosecutor asked him directly. She was careful. There is a difference, Agent Pruitt testified after him. She explained elder financial exploitation the way you'd explain a slow leak. By the time you see the damage, it's been going on a long time. She said the pattern typically started with caregiving, access, then small financial decisions, then larger ones, then isolation, then the narrative that the person wasn't reliable, wasn't remembering things right, couldn't manage on their own. The phrase wasn't reliable landed on me. How many times had Devon said Mom was having a bad stretch? How many times had Melissa mentioned she'd seemed confused lately? I had believed them, not all the way, not every time, but enough to not push, enough to give them room. The jury deliberated for 2 days, guilty on all counts. Both of them, Melissa received 5 years. Devon, as a direct family member with fiduciary access, received 7. The judge said what the judge said. He used words like premeditated and sustained and breach of trust. His voice was even. He didn't raise it. When the gavel came down, the room didn't erupt. People stood, gathered coats, spoke quietly. I sat there for a minute longer than I needed to, not because I was overcome, just because I wanted to be still for a moment and let it be what it was. Outside, Agent Pruitt found me on the steps. Your mother did the hard part, she said. I know, I told her. The weeks after the sentencing were quieter than I expected. No calls from attorneys. No pretend check-ins. The silence was different from the silence before, no longer the kind that makes you feel like something's approaching. Just ordinary quiet. Gerald handled the estate according to the will. The house on Birchwood Road came to me. I haven't sold it. I go there on Saturday mornings sometimes, and I sit on the porch, and I drink coffee, and I look at the roses, which someone in the neighborhood has been quietly watering since my mother died, and I haven't found out who yet. But I intend to thank them. The savings account was unfrozen once the legal hold was lifted. $214,000, same as Gerald had said. I put most of it into a fund for my youngest granddaughter's college. Set aside enough to repair the left side of the porch on Birchwood Road, the part that's been leaning since I was a teenager. Mom asked me to fix it twice over the years. I kept saying I'd get to it. I'm getting to it. The ring sits on my dresser now. I look at it every morning. It's not worth a fortune. Somewhere in the mid-range, the appraiser said, though more than Melissa had assumed. But that's not the point. My grandmother wore it to her job at the textile plant for 23 years. My mother wore it on her right hand after my grandmother died. The stone is the color of light through old glass. I think about keeping it or passing it on. I haven't decided. There's time. Evan wrote me a letter from the facility. 2 pages, single-spaced. Lots of words about pressure and regret and how things got complicated and how he never meant for it to go this far. He said he loved me. He said he hoped I could understand. I read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen table and made myself dinner and thought about it while I ate. I don't hate my son. I don't know if that's remarkable or just ordinary. He's still mine, the way a house with a bad foundation is still a house. But I'm not rebuilding something that was never as solid as I thought it was. Love doesn't require that. I haven't responded. Maybe I will someday. Not yet. Melissa's parents sent a card, one of those blank inside cards from the grocery store. They said they were sorry for my loss. I think they meant my mother. I'm not entirely sure. I never went back to the property on Birchwood Road to clear out Melissa's comments from my memory. That's not how memory works. But I've noticed over time that her voice gets quieter in there, and my mother's gets clearer. Last month, I ran into Gerald Fitch at the diner on Commerce Street. He was reading a newspaper, actual paper, folded in fourths the way people used to. He looked up when I came in and waved me over, and we had coffee for about 40 minutes. We talked about his retirement plans, which are not plans so much as tendencies. We talked about the walls, which are neither here nor there. We talked about my mother, briefly. He said she had a quality he didn't see often enough. She understood the difference between what she could control and what she could only prepare for. She prepared, he said, and then she trusted you to carry the rest of the way. I drove home from the diner and sat in the driveway for a few minutes before I went inside. Not because I was upset, just thinking. My mother had been alone in that house and she'd known what was happening, and she hadn't panicked and she hadn't confronted anyone, and she hadn't called me in tears asking me to fix it. She'd gotten on a bus, she'd walked into an office, she'd signed papers and written a note and slipped it into the ring box and set it back on the mantle. And then she'd made her coffee and tended her roses and waited for Tuesday morning in March to come for her the way it did. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. That doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. My mother had it in a way that I didn't fully understand until I was sitting in a dead woman's kitchen holding a velvet ring box that she'd turned into the last thing she'd ever give me. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if someone has started explaining away an older person's concerns, labeling them confused, stepping in to manage things for convenience, pay attention to that. Write things down. Ask questions directly. The person who loves you most might be the quietest one in the room, and quiet is not the same as fine. Thank you for staying with this story. Some of them are hard to tell, and this one was harder than most. But I think the ones worth telling usually are. If you'd like to share what this brought up for you, or tell me where you're listening from, I'd genuinely like to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it would mean something to me if you did. There are more of these stories to tell, and I'd like you to be here for them. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the ordinary kind of thinking you do when you're sitting on a porch early in the morning and the coffee's still too hot to drink and there's nothing demanding your attention for once. What Melissa and Devon didn't come from nowhere. That's the part I had to sit with. It started small, a comment here, a question there, a gradual tightening of access around an old woman who lived alone and trusted her family. They built it slowly because slow is harder to see, and the reason it almost worked is that I wasn't paying close enough attention. I gave them room because Devon was my son and I wanted to believe in him, and wanting to believe in someone can look a lot like wisdom when it's actually just comfort. My mother paid attention. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She was 81 years old, her hands weren't steady. She took the bus because she didn't feel safe asking for a ride from the people who were supposed to love her. And she was still the sharpest person in this whole story. She didn't panic. She didn't confront anyone. She documented everything, found the right person to trust, and made a plan. That's not luck. That's a kind of intelligence that most people never develop because it requires you to see clearly, when seeing clearly is the hardest possible thing. There's a lesson in that I'm still learning. Intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's being willing to act on what you know, even when acting costs you something. My mother knew what was happening, and she also knew that confronting it directly would only give them warning. So she did the harder thing. She prepared quietly and trusted the truth to do its job eventually. It did. The moral piece is something I think about differently now than I did before. I used to believe people were mostly good and occasionally made bad choices under pressure. I still believe that, partly. But I also believe now that goodness isn't passive. It requires maintenance. It requires you to ask uncomfortable questions and sit with the answers even when the answers change something you didn't want changed. Devon didn't become who he became overnight. Neither did Melissa. They made small choices over years that accumulated into something they couldn't take back. And I made small choices too, to not push, to not ask, to give the benefit of the doubt when the doubt was already telling me something. The resilience part came after the sentencing, after the attorney stopped calling, after the quiet settled in. I had to decide what to do with what was left, and what was left included my own son in a federal facility and a house on Birchwood Road with roses that needed tending. I chose the roses. I chose to fix the porch. Not because it erased anything, but because sitting in the damage doesn't rebuild it. My mother left me more than money and a ring. She left me a record of what it looks like to handle the worst thing with your hands steady and your head clear. I'm trying to do the same. Some days that's easier than others, but I know what the standard is now. I watched her set it.